November 2025. In the warm north of New South Wales, the days were stretching longer, slow, and humid. Holiday lights were beginning to sparkle on verandas, and the sound of kids laughing drifted across familiar streets. It was the kind of time of year when most people settle in, planning barbecues, road trips, and visits with family. But beneath that calm snapshot of everyday life, something felt slightly out of place. Not enough to ring alarm bells, just enough to make you look twice. A phone call left unanswered. A message opened but never replied to. A name no longer popping up in group chats or daily check-ins. At first, it could all be brushed aside. Probably busy. Must be tired. She'll get back to us soon. But days fade into weeks, and the silence becomes harder to ignore. People quietly start asking, has anyone seen her? Has anyone heard from her lately? No one had. As the calendar flipped into the new year 2026, the absence started to feel heavier. Not frightening in a dramatic way, but unsettling in that everyday sense when someone familiar slowly slips out of routine and no one can say exactly when it began. A family waiting, a community looking for answers, and a sense that something important had changed, even if no one yet knew what it was. So now, let's go back to the beginning and trace how it all unfolded. The disappearance of 20-year-old Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith is one of those cases that begins quietly, almost unnoticed, before growing into something that commands the attention of an entire community. Yolinda is a young woman with Indigenous heritage, raised in northern New South Wales and deeply connected to her family and culture. Small in stature but known for her warmth and gentle nature, she was the kind of person who stayed in touch regularly, the type who would reply with a message or a call, even if it was just to say she was okay. That pattern changed suddenly toward the end of November 2025. Somewhere in those final days of spring, Yolinda's regular contact with her family ceased. At first, there was no alarm. People take breaks from phones, step away from social media, or travel without telling everyone they know. But the silence stretched far too long. Texts were left hanging, calls went unanswered, and Yolinda, normally present and reachable, seemed to simply fall out of touch. By 7 January 2026, her family's concern had turned into serious worry. When efforts to reach her failed, they formally reported her missing to the Coffs, Clarence Police District. That moment marked a line between uncertainty and alarm. What had started as a quiet absence became an active investigation. The case was classified as high concern, not only because Yolinda is young, but because she belongs to a demographic recognized as particularly vulnerable, young First Nations women. In Australia, Indigenous families have long spoken about loved ones who vanish without clear explanations, sometimes without the urgent response other cases receive. What makes Yolinda's disappearance especially troubling is that there were no obvious clues, no confirmed sightings, no confirmed movements, no signs she left by choice or force. She simply slipped out of contact, leaving behind questions that have yet to find answers. And that uncertainty is what continues to drive the search today. To understand the weight of this disappearance, it helps to understand who Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith is beyond the name printed in official reports. Born and raised in northern New South Wales, Yolinda is part of a large extended Aboriginal family, deeply rooted in local community connections that stretch across towns, schools, and social circles. At just 20 years old, she is at that in-between stage of life, old enough to be independent, yet still tightly woven into the everyday lives of the people who raised her. Family describe Yolinda as warm, gentle, and quietly thoughtful. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was attentive, the type who noticed when someone needed help or a friendly ear. Friends say she moved through life with a calm energy, someone who avoided drama and treated people with patience and care. She played an active role in her young siblings' lives, often stepping in to help out or spend time with them. Physically, Yolinda is described as small in build, around 150 to 160 centimeters tall, with dark hair and brown eyes, features common among women from her heritage, but distinctive enough that those who knew her never mistook her for someone else. Her look rarely changed. She preferred practical clothing, simple hairstyles, and often wore a cross-body bag when out and about, a habit family noticed immediately when she stopped being seen with it on social media. What makes her story even more compelling is how consistent her routines were. Yolinda kept in touch, especially with family. She knew birthdays, checked in on cousins, and replied to messages, maybe not instantly, but reliably. So when that communication suddenly halted, it wasn't viewed as a phase or a mood shift. It was, in her mother's words, not like her at all. Those traits, regular contact, stable behavior, deep family ties, matter immensely in a missing person investigation. They paint the picture of someone who was not at risk of wandering off or voluntarily cutting ties. They also explain why her loved ones reacted so quickly, why concern escalated so sharply, and why police have taken the case seriously since the day it was reported. In many ways, Yolinda represents thousands of young women across Australia navigating early adulthood, anchored by family, and full of potential. Her absence isn't just a gap in a timeline. It is a silence where there used to be presence, laughter, and connection. One of the most significant parts of understanding Yolinda's disappearance is looking closely at the period just before she fell out of contact. Unlike many cases where the moment of vanishing is clear, a last sighting, a final phone call, CCTV footage, Yolinda's story begins with a fading trace, a gradual silence that took time before anyone recognized its significance. The last confirmed contact Yolinda had with her family was in late November 2025. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no urgent message or cryptic goodbye. It was a typical exchange, the kind she had with relatives every few days. And that, perhaps, is part of what makes this case unusual. The ending of communication didn't feel like the ending of anything at all. In the first week of December, her family believed she was simply busy. Young adults move around, visiting friends, staying with partners, picking up last-minute work shifts as the holidays approach. There was nothing initially that pointed to trouble. It wasn't until messages began to go unanswered that a subtle worry crept in. By mid-December, Christmas preparations were well underway, and the season itself highlighted Yolinda's absence. She loved the gathering side of the holidays, catching up with cousins, helping younger kids unwrap gifts, sharing meals. So, when she missed a nephew's Christmas event and failed to respond to family group chats, the concern deepened. Still, no one expected the worst. People reasoned with themselves. Maybe she'd taken up a seasonal job. Maybe she was traveling with friends. Maybe her phone had been lost or broken. Then came New Year's Eve, a turning point for many families, and this one was no different. While others counted down to midnight, Yolinda's relatives were quietly checking phones, refreshing social media, hoping for a sign, a post, a comment, a simple emoji. None appeared. As January arrived, the pattern or lack of one was undeniable. No phone activity, no photos online, no messages with friends, no sightings from anyone who regularly crossed paths with her. In a regional area where people tend to know when someone comes and goes, Yolinda's absence was beginning to stand out. By the first week of 2026, family members moved from worry to action. They visited places Yolinda had been known to stay, called friends, checked with relatives in nearby towns, and searched through their own networks for any trace of her. But every answer led nowhere. Finally, on 7 January 2026, after weeks of silence and failed attempts to locate her, Yolinda's family contacted the Coffs, Clarence Police District, to lodge an official missing person report. From that moment on, the absence became formal, recorded, investigated, and taken seriously by authorities. What makes this timeline so difficult is the ambiguity. No one can pinpoint the exact moment Yolinda slipped out of reach. There is no last confirmed sighting, no footage marking her final steps, no timestamp that says this was the moment everything changed. Instead, her disappearance is framed by what didn't happen, the call that never came, the message never returned, the plans left hanging, and that slow fade into silence remains one of the most haunting aspects of her case. When someone disappears, the natural instinct is to ask where. With Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith, that question is particularly difficult not because the areas are unknown, but because the space between them is wide, sparse, and full of unanswered possibilities. At the center of this mystery is northern New South Wales, a region that blends coastal towns, rural outskirts, and pockets of dense bushland. Yolinda grew up in this environment, a place where neighbors tend to know each other and where word travels quickly when someone moves, visits, or changes routine. It's the type of area where a familiar face can't vanish quietly, and yet somehow Yolinda did. The first anchor point is believed to be the Coffs Harbour Clarence area, a stretch of coastline home to beaches, schools, shopping centers, and First Nations communities. This is where she lived, where her family is located, and where her life was most grounded. If Yolinda was going to be found nearby, someone in this local catchment would have seen her at a bus stop, a cafe, a petrol station, a shopping center, or simply walking down the road. But she wasn't. As weeks passed without sightings, the investigation widened. Police raised the possibility that Yolinda may have traveled alone or with someone to Greater Sydney, roughly 5 to 6 hours south, depending on the route taken. This shift in focus was significant. Sydney is dense, fast-moving, and diverse, the kind of place where someone could blend in. A young woman moving through the city would not automatically attract attention, especially if she traveled with others or arrived without luggage. If Yolinda entered this urban environment, the search becomes exponentially more complex. In country towns, information spreads organically. In Sydney, anonymity is the default. This potential movement raises several practical questions. Investigators continue to consider, how would she get there? Yolinda did not own a car. That leaves public transport, a shared ride, or being driven by someone else. Did she travel voluntarily, or was she accompanied? The absence of communication suggests she didn't announce her plans. Would CCTV have caught her? Possibly, but without a specific time frame or location. Combing through footage is like hunting for a shadow. Between Coffs, Harbour, and Sydney, the geography opens up even further highways, truck routes, small towns, coastal stops, and national parks. Any of these could form part of Yolinda's last known path, though none have yet produced answers. Another factor complicating geography is Yolinda's community connection. Being part of a broad First Nations network means she could have acquaintances or distant relatives living in other regions: Lismore, Grafton, Kempsey, Port Macquarie, even Brisbane, which lies north rather than south. Police have not ruled out alternative directions of travel. Then comes the environment itself. Northern NSW is rich with rugged and remote areas, thick forest, farmland, river systems, and kilometers of country roads. These are places where travelers go deliberately hiking, camping, working seasonal jobs, but also places where someone could be missed if no one knew to look. Ultimately, what makes geography central to this case is not a single scene where Yolinda was last spotted, but the absence of one. There is no verified last location, no confirmed journey, no physical item found, no witness saying, "I saw her here." Instead, the investigation sits between two broad possibilities. She stayed close to home, unseen, or she traveled far, perhaps farther than anyone expected. Both paths remain open because the landscape, physical, social, and cultural, leaves room for either outcome. For detectives, every square kilometer is both promising and frustrating. It contains clues yet to be found, an empty space where answers seem to evaporate. Once the formal missing person report was filed on 7 January 2026, Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith's case shifted from a private family worry into a coordinated effort involving police, community networks, and, eventually, public attention. The initial phase focused on the basics, confirming when Yolinda was last seen, identifying who had spoken to her most recently, and gathering anything that resembled a lead. Because there was no definitive last location, detectives from the Coffs, Clarence Police District, had to start from zero. This meant interviewing family members, friends, acquaintances, and community contacts, asking the same questions in different ways. When did you last speak to her? Did she mention travel plans? Was she staying with anyone new? Had she seemed distressed or withdrawn? Each answer helped shape a timeline, though none filled in the blanks completely. Police quickly recognized that the length of Yolinda's silence was highly unusual for someone her age. This wasn't a case of a teenager temporarily withdrawing or a young adult hiding out after an argument. Weeks had passed without bank activity, phone usage, or social media presence. That silence alone made the investigation a high-priority concern. With limited digital traces to work from, the search broadened outward. Patrol units conducted door knocks around neighborhoods she'd previously visited. Officers checked with hospitals and emergency departments across the region, no matches. Public transport databases were cross-checked where possible for recent card taps, though no confirmed travel record was linked to Yolinda. The most significant shift came when police went public. A media release was issued describing Yolinda's appearance and urging anyone with information, even a rumor or a possible sighting, to come forward. Unlike fictional crime stories, real cases hinge on community response, and this one was no exception. Members of the public began sharing the alert on social media. First Nations networks circulated her image among community groups, and local organizations that work with women and youth added their voices. At the heart of the public appeal was a single message: if you've seen Yolinda now or in recent months, please contact police. Authorities emphasized something important. Do not send tips through Facebook pages or comment sections where they might be lost, misinterpreted, or misused. Instead, police directed all leads to Crime Stoppers 1-800-333-000 or online, a secure pathway where information is recorded, verified, and forwarded directly to investigators. Behind the scenes, police analysts continued to trawl for threads. CCTV submissions from service stations and shopping strips, phone providers checking for any incoming, outgoing activity. Possible travel routes toward Sydney. Mentions of Yolinda's name in emergency systems or outreach services. Meanwhile, the family's role became just as crucial. They revisited places Yolinda had stayed, retraced familiar routes, contacted extended relatives across NSW and Queensland, and encouraged anyone who might have seen her even in passing to speak up. In Indigenous communities, informal information networks can travel faster than official channels, and police recognize their importance. Despite the effort, one challenge persists: lack of a confirmed anchor point. No witness has come forward with a definitive sighting. No item belonging to Yolinda has surfaced. No digital footprint has reactivated. Yet, the absence of confirmation keeps the search alive rather than shutting it down. A missing person case remains open until resolution, and Yolinda's file is sitting in that active category. For many supporting the search, the strategy now is sustained visibility, keeping her photo circulating, renewing media appeals, checking CCTV periodically for new leads, ensuring Yolinda's name is not forgotten as weeks turn into months. In missing person cases, momentum matters. And while answers have yet to appear, the coordination between family, community, and police continues, driven by a shared belief that even the smallest piece of information could become the breakthrough everyone has been waiting for. With investigators still searching for concrete answers, the disappearance of Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith remains surrounded by possibility rather than certainty. Because there is no verified last sighting, no recovered belongings, and no digital activity since late 2025, detectives have had to explore several plausible theories, each grounded in real-world patterns seen in similar cases across Australia. 1. Voluntary departure. But why so quiet? One of the earliest considerations was that Yolinda may have chosen to step away from normal routines. Young adults sometimes withdraw temporarily, particularly during stressful periods or life transitions. However, several details make this scenario less straightforward. She left no message for family. She took no visible belongings. She has made no contact for months. There are no digital traces, even passive ones. Most people who leave voluntarily eventually tap a bank card, turn on a phone, or speak to someone in their circle. Yolinda's silence has lasted significantly longer than usual for this scenario, keeping the door open but raising questions. 2. Unplanned events. While traveling or camping, northern NSW and the mid-north coast contain vast stretches of bushland, rivers, back roads, and rugged rural areas. Locals often hike, travel informally, or camp outside populated zones. If Yolinda was traveling without telling others, it is possible she encountered difficulties. The challenge for investigators is that this theory offers thousands of square kilometers to consider and no pinpoint starting location. 3. Staying with someone known or unknown. Another working theory is that Yolinda may be with someone who has not stepped forward intentionally or not. This includes friends she met socially, acquaintances not known to family, short-term accommodation circles, informal household arrangements. In some cases, individuals disengage from family networks while forming new social connections. Without digital contact, though, police must rely on interviews and tips, slower and less predictable channels. 4. Identity change or travel interstate. Australia sees rare cases of people leaving their state or region without notice. If Yolinda boarded interstate transport or joined someone traveling long distance, she could now be outside NSW. Investigators have consulted partner agencies in Queensland and Victoria, though no confirmed sightings have been linked. 5. third-party involvement, considered but unproven. Whenever a person vanishes without obvious explanation, investigators must consider the possibility that someone else may have played a role, whether intentionally or inadvertently. Police stress this point carefully. No evidence has surfaced to confirm this scenario. However, until a reliable alternative emerges, it remains a working possibility. This is why investigators have rechecked witness statements and cross-referenced phone metadata not to accuse, but to eliminate uncertainty. In the absence of a singular dominant theory, the investigation remains broad by necessity. Each possibility, from voluntary departure to unforeseen emergency, stays on the table until evidence proves otherwise. For now, detectives continue methodically testing scenarios, confident that even the smallest revelation could collapse the guesswork and bring answers into focus. While investigators work methodically through phone records, interviews, and search leads, the emotional cost of Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith's disappearance has landed hardest on the people who knew her best. For Yolinda's family, life has become divided into two timelines: the days before she went silent and every day since. Relatives describe her absence as a quiet that never stops ringing. Birthdays, gatherings, and simple everyday moments now carry a constant sense of something or someone missing. There is no closure, no certainty to anchor their fears or soften their hope. Instead, the family lives in a suspended state, moving through ordinary life while waiting for a phone call that has yet to come. One of the most confronting aspects for families in situations like this is the lack of answers. With no confirmed sighting and no explanation, imagination fills the void, not always kindly. Every knock at the door, every unknown number calling, becomes both a possibility and a threat. In many ways, uncertainty is its own kind of hardship. Beyond the immediate household, Yolinda's disappearance has created ripples across the broader community, particularly among First Nations networks across NSW. Local elders, support workers, and advocacy groups have united behind the search, raising awareness in spaces where police releases don't always reach. For many, this case is tragic, but not unfamiliar. Indigenous families are statistically more likely to experience disappearances that receive limited coverage, and that history weighs heavily in how communities respond. Neighborhood groups have rallied quietly, sharing Yolinda's image, organizing informal check-ins, and making sure her name doesn't slip unnoticed into the long list of unresolved cases. There is a shared understanding that visibility matters. As long as people keep looking for her, the chances of answers stay alive. In some ways, Yolinda's disappearance has become a symbol of something larger: the unseen emotional toll that missing person cases leave behind. Every unanswered question is tied to a human being, and behind every search notice stands a family trying to stay strong without losing themselves to fear. For the community around Coffs Harbour, the message remains simple and unbroken. Someone knows something, and until the truth arrives, they will keep Yolinda's story moving forward. As of early 2026, the disappearance of Yolinda Cavanagh-Smith remains unresolved. Despite weeks of interviews, database checks, public appeals, and behind-the-scenes investigative work, authorities have not confirmed a verified sighting of the 20-year-old since late 2025. Police stress that Yolinda's case is active, ongoing, and open. Detectives continue reviewing incoming tips, revisiting earlier interviews, and cross-checking information against new data sources. Missing person investigations can shift suddenly with just a single message, a camera snapshot, or a passing recollection, and Yolinda's family holds tightly to that possibility. One of the challenges investigators face is the case's lack of anchor points. No digital activity, no bank trail, and no confirmed location make it harder to narrow the search. However, that does not mean Yolinda is forgotten. When official updates slow, work continues in quieter forms. Data analysis, interstate communication, and routine rechecking of old leads that may look different as time moves on. For Yolinda's loved ones, the goal is now as clear as it is simple. Keep her name visible, keep her story circulating, and keep asking for answers. Police continue urging the public to remain alert. Even minor observations can matter, especially when they help build a timeline or eliminate uncertainty. Authorities emphasize that information should be given directly through official channels, not rumors, not online speculation, but real tips that investigators can log and verify. Anyone with details recent or historical is encouraged to contact. You do not need to be certain, you only need to speak up if something didn't sit right. Someone mentioned a detail in passing, or you believe you saw Yolinda somewhere. For now, the case sits at a crossroads. No evidence confirming the worst, none confirming the best. Until answers surface, one truth stands firm. Someone knows something, and the door remains open for Yolinda to be found.